Help me hit 7,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Thank you. I never imagined marriage would feel this way. I always thought that after a long day, after the arguments and the laughter, the tiredness would only bring us closer. But sometimes, exhaustion doesn't just lie in the body. It creeps into the heart, into the space where love is supposed to live. My name is James. I'm 38, and I've been married to Claire for 12 years. When we first met, she was vivacious, radiant, someone who could light up a room just by smiling. I was quieter, more reserved, but steady. We balanced each other, or at least I thought we did. For the first few years, we had that kind of connection people write songs about. We'd cook together, take spontaneous road trips, and text silly little jokes to each other during work hours. There was laughter, touch, and warmth. I remember falling asleep on the couch while she hummed softly beside me. There was a rhythm, a give and take, a sense that we were both invested in keeping the spark alive. But after year 7, I started noticing the cracks. Claire became distant, not just physically but emotionally. It wasn't that she was overtly cruel or angry. She simply withdrew. Small gestures that used to matter to her now seemed inconsequential. A kiss on the cheek might be met with a shrug, a hug held only for a brief second. Conversations became mechanical, words exchanged without emotion, as if we were roommates rather than partners. I tried to chalk it up to life stress. The job, the bills, our son's constant demands. I told myself she was tired, overworked, or just needed space. But space wasn't all she needed. It was something more. It felt like a wall had quietly risen between us, brick by brick, until there was nothing left but silence. I tried to reach her, gently, in ways I thought she would respond to. Notes in her bag, small surprises, planning a weekend getaway. Nothing. The more I tried, the more distant she became. And then came the words I'll never forget. I'm tired. Don't touch me. I froze the first time she said it. Just a simple phrase, but it landed like a thunderclap. I remember standing there, arms extended, trying to close the gap between us, and she pulled back. Not angrily, not even resentfully, but completely indifferent. That moment shifted something in me. For weeks, I replayed it in my mind, analyzing everything I might have done wrong, wondering if I had somehow failed in a marriage that I had worked so hard to build. For a long time, I held on. I convinced myself that patience and understanding were enough to restore what we had lost. I did everything a husband is supposed to do. Paid the bills, helped with our son's homework, cooked dinner, and listened when she talked about her day. But I couldn't cook warmth into someone's heart, and I couldn't make affection appear where it had quietly disappeared. Every touch, every attempt at intimacy was met with rejection, and each rejection chipped away at the man I thought I was. I remember one night in particular, the night that began to change everything. I had been feeling particularly hopeful, thinking maybe a heartfelt conversation would break through the walls. We sat at the dinner table, our son asleep upstairs, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I reached out, gently brushing her hand, hoping for a sign of connection, a flicker of the woman I had fallen in love with. And she looked at me, eyes hollow, and said again, "Don't, just don't." In that moment, clarity replaced confusion. I realized it wasn't about the small annoyances or life's fatigue. She didn't want me. Not today, not yesterday, not for years. And the realization didn't make me angry. It made me painfully aware of my own need for recognition, for love, for mutual respect. I had been giving and giving, hoping that my devotion would be enough to keep us together. But devotion without reciprocity is just endurance. The next days were quiet, heavier than usual. I found myself observing her from across the room, noticing the absence of gestures, the void where affection should have been. And slowly, I began to recognize a truth I had avoided. A marriage without intimacy, without emotional presence, is not a marriage. It's a cohabitation. It's two people sharing a space but living separate lives. And in that space, I had been losing myself. It was then that I began to shift. I stopped chasing. I stopped forcing smiles and hugs where they were unwelcome. I focused instead on my own routine, my own sense of self. For the first time in years, I allowed myself the quiet satisfaction of personal choice, of reclaiming the man I had put aside for a wife who no longer wanted me. And in that reclamation, I noticed a strange sense of peace. Not loud or dramatic, not vindictive or triumphant, just quiet clarity. The subtle changes in my behavior didn't go unnoticed. Claire noticed, of course. I stopped being available on demand, stopped bending every rule of my own life to accommodate her mood. I became predictable in my autonomy, a stark contrast to the man she had come to ignore. And as she reacted, sometimes with irritation, sometimes with quiet astonishment, I realized that her rejection had lost its power over me. I wasn't asking for affection anymore. I was demanding respect, and if she couldn't offer that, it was no longer my burden to carry. It wasn't about revenge, at least not in the traditional sense. I didn't plot, I didn't strategize, I just changed the dynamic. When she reached for me and I stepped back, the silence spoke louder than any argument ever could. For years, I had equated love with constant sacrifice, with bending myself to fit her moods, her needs, her exhaustion. But that night, I realized something fundamental. Love is mutual. Respect is mandatory. And without those, everything else is meaningless. The first time I firmly said, "I'm tired. Don't touch me," it felt foreign. My voice didn't tremble, it didn't raise. It was calm, measured, almost strange to hear coming from me. But it wasn't cold, it was honest. For the first time, I mirrored her own words back to her, not as an attack, but as an acknowledgement of reality. The walls that had separated us for years suddenly had a mirror. She had been pushing me away, and now I wasn't letting myself be pushed. It wasn't immediate, of course. Change never is. At first, she seemed confused, perhaps even annoyed. I noticed the way she watched me from across the room, trying to read the cues she had ignored for so long. But I didn't budge. I continued my life with clarity and intention. I engaged with our son fully. I pursued my own interests. I started reconnecting with old friends. The man I had almost lost in the shadow of her withdrawal was coming back. And with every step I took for myself, I felt lighter, freer, like I was shedding years of unspoken tension that had weighed me down. Over time, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Not dramatically, not in a sudden, cinematic way, but subtly. The tension, the constant anticipation of rejection, began to ease. Claire still had her moments of coldness, but I had learned not to internalize them. I was no longer a passive participant in my own life, waiting for affection that might never come. I had become active, present, self-respecting. And that shift, more than anything, altered the way she interacted with me. There was a day, weeks later, that stuck with me. We were sitting in the living room after dinner, a quiet moment where the house had finally settled into calm. I looked at her and simply said, "I need space tonight." No anger, no blame, no dramatics, just honesty. And she nodded. Not with resentment, not with surprise, just acknowledgement. And in that brief exchange, I realized something profound. When you respect your own boundaries, people are forced to see you differently. They may not change their behavior, but they will recognize your presence in a new light. The journey wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, moments of frustration, times I caught myself yearning for the warmth we once had. But those moments were tempered by the understanding that I couldn't manufacture love where it didn't exist. I could only choose how to treat myself, how to assert my own worth. And that choice, though difficult at first, became liberating. I stopped measuring my happiness based on her reactions. I stopped shrinking to fit a mold that had long ceased to exist. Looking back now, I can see how much I had tolerated silently. The rejection, the indifference, the gradual erosion of connection. It had all been a slow, almost invisible weight pressing down on me. And while I had once believed endurance was a virtue, I learned that wisdom lies in discernment. Knowing when to step back, when to reclaim your energy, and when to stop allowing others' apathy to dictate your self-worth. This is the lesson that I carry with me now. I won't pretend that everything is perfect between us. We are still married in legal terms, but the dynamic has irrevocably changed. I no longer approach her with the same unguarded heart I once did. My touch, my words, my presence, they are no longer freely given without reciprocity. And in that careful, deliberate approach, I found a strange kind of peace. A quiet satisfaction that comes not from punishment or revenge, but from clarity, self-respect, and the knowledge that my emotional well-being is no longer negotiable. Sometimes, in the late evenings, I still catch myself remembering the early years, the laughter, the tenderness, the late-night talks that stretched until sunrise. Those memories aren't painful. They're bittersweet reminders of what was, and what can't be forced to return. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate realization. Love cannot be demanded, coaxed, or imposed. It exists where it is nurtured mutually, and when it fades, the only course left is honesty. Honesty with yourself, honesty with the other person, and above all, the courage to reclaim your own life. And so now, when I say, "I'm tired, don't touch me," it is not in bitterness or spite. It is in the assertion of my own dignity. It is a line drawn in quiet clarity, a recognition of my own needs, and a refusal to let myself disappear in the shadow of someone else's indifference. It is a statement not of anger, but of strength. And for the first time in years, I feel entirely, profoundly alive.